China just realized it has a massive problem. Japan can now hit targets 1,000 kilometers inside China, and Beijing had no idea it was happening until it was too late. Here's how it happened. Japan just approved $58 billion for defense, the biggest military budget since World War II. That single decision catapulted them to third place globally, right behind the US and China in military spending. But here's the thing. The dollar amount isn't what's keeping Chinese planners up at night. It's what Japan's buying with that money. Missiles that can reach over 1,000 kilometers into Chinese waters. Hypersonic weapons screaming through the atmosphere at Mach 5. Drone swarms that patrol 24/7 without a single pilot. And every single system designed with one adversary in mind, the People's Liberation Army. Beijing is furious, calling this buildup a sinister plot. But the reality is far more uncomfortable for China. Because for the first time in modern history, Japanese weapons can reach Chinese warships and coastal bases before they even leave port. In this video, you'll see exactly how these billion-dollar weapons work, how they exploit China's critical vulnerabilities around Taiwan and the Miyako Strait, and the one question keeping military planners in both Beijing and Washington awake at night: is Japan quietly transforming itself into the Indo-Pacific's next offensive military power? And what happens if these systems are used for real? Start with the geography. Japan sits right on China's maritime escape route into the Pacific, the narrow choke points between Okinawa, the Miyako Strait, and the island chain stretching down toward Taiwan. Every Chinese carrier group and missile destroyer that wants to break into the wider Pacific has to squeeze through these gaps. Under the shadow of Japanese and American bases, China has spent decades building an anti-access area denial bubble, hundreds of land-based anti-ship and ballistic missiles designed to push US carriers away from its coastline. The problem for Japan was simple. Its own missiles were short-legged. Traditional anti-ship systems, like the older Type 12, could only reach a couple of hundred kilometers, forcing Japanese platforms to move dangerously close to the fight if they wanted to threaten Chinese ships. In a war over Taiwan, that is a losing proposition. China can flood the region with ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, drones, and submarines. If Japan cannot strike from a distance, its ships and bases become high-value targets, sitting under a Chinese missile umbrella. So here is the question driving this entire video. Can Japan's new generation of long-range missiles, hypersonic weapons, and drone defenses really change the battlefield against China? Or is this just an expensive signal with limited impact? On one side, China, a rapidly expanding blue water navy, now the world's largest by hull count, is pushing further into the Western Pacific each year. Long-range anti-ship ballistic missiles designed to threaten US and Japanese ships out to and beyond the first island chain. On the other side, Japan, a technologically advanced country that deliberately capped its military for decades, but is now rewriting its security strategy and explicitly naming China as the greatest strategic challenge in its neighborhood. New legal and doctrinal acceptance of counterstrike capability, the idea that Japan can hit enemy bases, not just defend its own territory. And in the middle, you have the United States, whose bases in Japan are critical for any defense of Taiwan, but whose own missile stockpiles and logistics could be stretched thin in a prolonged conflict. This is where everything gets interesting. Tokyo is not just buying bigger missiles, it is building a layered system: long-range anti-ship missiles, hypersonic glide weapons, advanced air defenses, and autonomous drones, specifically designed to make Chinese operations around Japan and Taiwan much more dangerous, much more complex, and potentially too costly to attempt. Here's the first big shock to Chinese planners. Japan took its Type 12 surface-to-ship missile, traditionally a coastal defense weapon with a range of roughly 200 kilometers, and began upgrading it into an extended-range system capable of reaching over 1,000 kilometers, a five-fold increase. To put that in context, 1,000 kilometers is roughly the distance from Tokyo to Shanghai. It means ground-based launchers on Japan's main islands or southwestern archipelago could threaten Chinese warships and even coastal targets far beyond the immediate vicinity of Japan. Tokyo has accelerated this program, pulling forward deployment schedules and investing over $1 billion into mass production and integration. These missiles will not just sit on a few fixed sites. The goal is mobile launchers dispersed across Japan's island chain, including areas like Kumamoto and potentially the Ryukyu Islands, turning key straits into lethal gauntlets. Why does this matter? Because the Miyako Strait, a roughly 250-kilometer wide gap between Okinawa and Miyako Island, is one of China's main blue water gateways. With extended-range Type 12 batteries, Japan can create what analysts describe as a no-go zone for Chinese surface groups trying to exit the East China Sea into the wider Pacific. These missiles fly at high subsonic speed, use advanced guidance, and can be cued by multiple sensors, including maritime patrol aircraft and allied assets. But here's the kicker. This is only the first layer. Long-range subsonic anti-ship missiles complicate Chinese planning, but they can still be countered by modern air defenses and electronic warfare. Japanese planners know that, which is why the next system is built to be much harder to stop. The second pillar of Japan's new arsenal is the Hypervelocity Glide Projectile, or HVGP, a hypersonic weapon designed to travel at speeds of around Mach 5 and above while maneuvering in the atmosphere. Unlike a classic ballistic missile that follows a predictable arc, a hypersonic glide vehicle rides the edge of space and the upper atmosphere, then maneuvers in the terminal phase, making interception far more difficult. Japan's HVGP program is being rolled out in blocks. The Block 1 version, planned for deployment later this decade, is tailored for regional targets in the 500 to 900 kilometer range, enough to hit ships and key nodes in a Taiwan Strait conflict from Japanese territory. Future Block 2 variants are projected to stretch that range to 2,000 and even 3,000 kilometers, potentially reaching deep into the Chinese mainland. Why does this keep Chinese planners up at night? First, speed plus maneuverability. A projectile moving at hypersonic speed, over 3,800 miles per hour, gives defenders very little warning and very little time to calculate an intercept solution. Second, precision. Japan's concept is not just fast rocks. These are expected to carry advanced seekers and be optimized for high-value targets like carrier strike groups or critical infrastructure. In wargame models, a mixed salvo of extended-range Type 12 missiles and HVGPs could saturate Chinese defenses. Subsonic cruise missiles are forcing ships to light up their radars and expend interceptors, while hypersonic glide vehicles dive in on different trajectories. But there is one problem nobody is talking about enough. Hypersonic programs are expensive, technically challenging, and politically sensitive. Japan has to balance speed of deployment against reliability. A hypersonic weapon that fails in flight is not just a dud, it is a signal of weakness. That pressure is part of the story, and it pushes Tokyo toward another domain where Japan already excels: autonomy and robotics. Everyone talks about missiles, but Japan is also investing hundreds of millions of dollars in something more subtle: a networked drone defense and surveillance umbrella along its southwestern islands. Under programs often described as building a drone wall, Tokyo is developing swarms of unmanned aerial, surface, and undersea systems designed to monitor and, eventually, contest Chinese activity near its territory. One centerpiece concept is a littoral defense architecture, sometimes referred to by acronyms like SHIELD, a synchronized, hybrid, integrated system for coastal defense that uses drones as persistent sensors and, in some roles, as expendable shooters. Think of small, unmanned surface vessels patrolling key straits, underwater drones mapping and tracking submarine routes, and long-endurance unmanned aircraft orbiting above, all feeding data back to ground stations and missile battery. The direct impact is threefold. Persistent eyes and ears. Unmanned systems can stay on station for far longer than crewed platforms, giving Japan continuous coverage across vast ocean spaces without burning through pilot hours or risking lives. Kill chain closure. Long-range missiles like the Type 12 and HVGP are useless without targeting data. Drone networks help close that kill chain, tracking Chinese ships and relaying real-time locations to missile units. Risk distribution. In a crisis, losing a drone is acceptable. Losing a crewed destroyer or patrol aircraft is not. Drones allow Japan to probe and monitor Chinese movements without escalating as quickly. But here is where it gets more interesting. As Japan fields more autonomous systems, China must devote more resources to counter drone operations, jamming, shooting down small targets, and hunting unmanned submarines. That dilutes the Chinese focus and can expose gaps for allied forces to exploit. However, drones and missiles alone do not solve one of Japan's biggest vulnerabilities, defending its own bases and cities from China's growing arsenal of ballistic and cruise missiles. That is where the next layer comes in. If Japan is building a sword, it also needs a shield. China has deployed hundreds of short and medium-range ballistic missiles that can reach Japanese bases, ports, and logistics hubs. To address this, Tokyo is not only modernizing its cooperation with U.S. systems like Aegis and Patriot, but also upgrading its own domestic air defense, especially the Type 03 Chu SAM Kai. The Chu-SAM is a medium-range surface-to-air missile system designed to intercept aircraft and, in upgraded variants, certain types of cruise and ballistic threats. The Kai version incorporates improved radar, better guidance, and enhanced capability against high-speed, low-flying targets, exactly the kind of profile used by advanced cruise missiles. Japan is moving this system into mass production as part of a broader, layered defense architecture. Lower layer, systems like Chu-SAM Kai for the regional defense of key bases and infrastructure. Upper layer, Aegis destroyers and future systems to intercept longer-range ballistic threats at a higher altitude in their trajectory. The message to China is clear. Saturating Japanese defenses will require more missiles, more planning, and more risk. That erodes one of Beijing's traditional advantages, mass, and buys time for Japanese and U.S. forces to stay in the fight. But there is one more piece that ties all of this together and elevates Japan from a purely defensive actor to a genuine counterstrike partner in any conflict over Taiwan or the East China Sea. For decades, Japan's official line was simple: a self-defense force limited to protecting its own territory. That fiction is gone. Recent strategy documents explicitly endorse the concept of counterstrike capabilities, meaning Japan will have the legal and doctrinal framework to hit enemy bases, missiles, and command nodes if an attack is imminent or underway. This shift is backed by money and hardware, long-range Type 12 variants, and hypersonic HVGPs that can hit across the first island chain and into parts of China. Plans to buy and integrate U.S. systems like Tomahawk cruise missiles, giving Japan an immediate long-range strike option, while domestic programs scale up. Investments in logistics and munitions stockpiles, so Japan is not left empty-handed after the first salvo. In practical terms, wargame projections suggest a future Taiwan scenario would not just be the U.S. Instead, Japanese forces could launch coordinated salvos of anti-ship and land attack missiles, backed by drone surveillance and shielded by layered air defenses, directly threatening Chinese ships, airfields, and even support nodes on the mainland. This is the part that keeps Chinese planners up at night. They can no longer assume Japan is just a static staging area. It becomes an active strike partner with its own independent kill chains. That forces Beijing to allocate more missiles, more submarines, and more air power to suppress Japanese capabilities, reducing what it can throw at U.S. forces or Taiwan itself. Can Japan's new billion-dollar weapons really change the battlefield against China? Yes, but they are not a magic solution. Japan's upgraded Type 12 missiles, HVGP hypersonic weapons, drone networks, and layered air defenses do not give Tokyo numerical superiority. China still has more ships, more missiles, more aircraft. What they do is raise the cost. They turn choke points into kill zones, force Beijing to spread resources thinner, and ensure any strike on Japan triggers immediate long-range retaliation. First, Japan is no longer just a base. It is a strike partner with weapons that can reach deep into Chinese operational space. Second, the real power is the network, drones, sensors, and missiles working together to detect, decide, and strike faster than the opponent. Third, this is an arms race. China will respond with better defenses and its own hypersonic systems. By 2030, the Western Pacific will be defined by hypersonic salvos and drone swarms. Japan is building for that world. The question now is not whether these weapons matter, it is how fast China can adapt. Because in a crisis, that adaptation time could be the difference between deterrence and disaster. If this video helped you stay updated, tap like, share it around, and subscribe for the next big tech story.